Welcome to the Healthcare IT Today CIO podcast. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today, and I'm excited to bring you the most practical healthcare CIO insights and perspectives. We know your job is challenging and we want to help you be more successful. And our guest today is Bill Hudson. He's chief digital strategist at Aidoc and a former CIO at INTEGRIS Health and John Muir Health. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you on the show. You have a nice history as CIO. Excited to learn about your new adventure at Aidoc. But for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and Aidoc.
Thanks. I've been in the healthcare space for a long time. I spent the last 8 years as a CIO. Before that, way back beginning my career, I ran global technologies for Cerner. I've spent time as a consultant. I worked with VMware for a period of time. And so I jokingly say when I sit down with one of our partners that, I've had every seat around the table. And, as I start looking at the ability to use digital to drive better patient outcomes and to help address some of the top line challenges that pretty much every health system in this country is facing, AI is one of those things that keeps coming up as this is going to be a differentiator. This is going to be a game changer to help us get to that next level. And so I wanted to be part of an organization that was really forward thinking about using precision AI to really kind of address some of those most serious challenges that our physicians and our health systems are dealing with. And so I had an opportunity to join the organization, and I did, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because you're right. It seems like you've had every piece of infrastructure, software,
Yeah.
CIO, CTO. That's an interesting background.
I look at it from the standpoint. I was having a conversation with a chief nursing officer this morning that I used to work with, and I look at it from the standpoint of all those different roles have given me a different perspective on my role and how I do my job and how I think about my job. And a few years ago, I did my MBA, and it really got me thinking about the economics around healthcare in a very different way.
Hmm.
And I look at this as an opportunity for me to use AI and digital to really kind of help other organizations think about things differently in terms of how they operate and how they can really leverage these technologies to really, again, address some of those challenges. We're never going to have more nurses than we have now. We're never going to have more doctors than we have now. I mean, we're struggling with the number of clinicians we have, and we need to be able to give those clinicians more tools to be efficient. And I think, to me, that's what this is about, is helping those organizations give that time back to nurses, give that time back to doctors so they can be doctors. I was listening on a podcast the other day, and there was a quote by a Deloitte leader that said, that digitizing something is about making it more efficient and making it more effective. If we're doing it it's slow, that could just be technology. That could just be the real tech. We've done that. Digital and AI is about really getting to a level of efficiency and productivity, and maybe takes the computer out of the middle of the interaction between our patients and our clinicians. And I think the opportunity to do that is huge.
It's fascinating you say that because I would say EHRs have not done that, and everyone agrees because we essentially said, oh, wait, now that we have the EHR, we can require you to do more and track more data. So in many ways, they automated paper processes, they converted them. We needed the data, but AI seems to hold that promise of what you said. We're seeing some of that with ambient clinical voice and whatnot, where it's like, yeah, this actually could make you more efficient the way technology should, rather than just be another way to track the data and get paid, right?
Oh, I think you're right. And I think a lot of that getting paid is the thing that everyone's been so focused on, that nurses sometimes feel like they're accountants having to track down, the number of Q-tips that are being used. And by the way, I'm exaggerating, but that's how folks feel. And if you think about it, we've made a huge progress in the last 20 years in terms of digitizing the paper record, giving people access to that. And I know we talk about the complexities and the challenges around interoperability, but we're in a pretty good state right now. Not perfect, but we're way better than we were 20 years ago. But that's come at a cost. We have put the burden of technology on the backs of every nurse and every doctor that practices medicine in our country, to the point that nurses, feel like stenographers as much as anything. tracking and doing. And do we have better patient outcomes as a result? Yes. Do we have safer patient outcomes as a result? Yes. But we've also distracted our nurses. We've distracted our doctors from patient care.
Hmm.
And I think that's the promise of a real digital process, a real try of leveraging AI, is to be that augmented function to help our nurses and doctors be able to be in the moment, listening to their patients, paying attention to their patients, and having that ambient technology help them capture that interaction. Having that precision AI that works in the background to help them, to not replace them, but help them be better doctors, help them be better nurses by helping to get to better patient outcomes because they're so busy. And AI has the power of being always on and always available to access. That is a huge opportunity for us to really to change how our patients' outcomes are in this space.
Yeah. Ideally, it doesn't replace them, it replaces the administrative overhead they hate. So I think that's the dream.
And let's be clear, nobody loves that, right? The administrative overhead is something that nobody likes.
Yeah, you don't want to do your travel recs, right?
Listen, patients don't like it, doctors don't like it. The only organizations that benefit from this are organizations that benefit from the slow ability to process
Mm,
proper paperwork and then reimburse. All right. But at the end of the day, this is not something that provider healthcare really is in the business of doing. It's in the business of having to do.
yeah. Well, I want to dive more into AI, but before we go there, I find it fascinating that you're leaving your role as CIO to the vendor side. I'm sure there's
Mhm.
many who listen to this podcast that are saying, should I do the same? Why would I do the same? What does that look like? It sounds like you've been on both sides a few different times. What would you say to them, and why did you decide to kind of leave your CIO role? Is it this AI what's the right word, this explosion of AI that got you excited, and what would you say to others that are considering that move?
Well, I think I said a second ago, and I can reiterate this, but I think the opportunity to work with a different set of customers and to be really focused on helping to drive change in this space is really, to me, important.
Hmm.
I look at this from the standpoint of I want to drive better patient outcomes, through technology and the digitization of that technology and enabling physicians, enabling patients, enabling our nurses. And I think that's something that's near and dear to me. If you go back to COVID and when I was at John Muir and we helped manage vaccinations for Contra Costa County, we did that in an entirely digital manner because we'd work with our patients, work with the community to help drive for that. We put the infrastructure in place. And now we're a couple years later and we're almost forgetting about how much progress we had made, and everyone's focused on the tele bit of this, and good or bad. But the point is the digital muscles that we put together in terms of how doctors and nurses work together and how we work with our partners in their community to enable that care. And we shouldn't lose that momentum. And for me, this is an opportunity for me to go work not with just one organization, but this opportunity for me to work with hundreds of organizations across the country and to really kind of help them, maintain that progress and help drive towards those outcomes. And to me, that's super exciting to be able to work with, some of the smartest people in this space, in the AI space, working with some of the most progressive organizations as they're really implementing AI to drive to better outcomes. And I think that becomes this innovation flywheel where we all learn from each other and we drive and we push ourselves to be better, and we can rapidly accelerate the adoption of these appropriate technologies into our patient care, into our administrative spaces, to really kind of really change the future of healthcare in this country. There is nobody here that can look at this and say we can continue the way the way we are, because there's not enough nurses, there's not enough doctors, and our administrative costs have only continued to increase as our documentation requirements have increased. I want to be part of that. And so I looked at this as an opportunity and say, I want to be part of something that's big, that's changing the space. I've certainly got experience in this area, and I'd like to bring what I have around health systems and how to get things done within health systems and how to partner with clinicians to drive this change. And I wanted to help and do this with Aidoc and use this as opportunity to drive that change in the environment. And to me, that was the opportunity. And I was like, like, this is super excited. And my wife and I were talking about this, and she's like, I haven't seen you this excited about anything in a long time. And I'm like, it's not that it's a new thing, but it's ability to be able to help literally raise the level across the entire provider ecosystem and do my part in that. And that was what was interesting to me.
Yeah.
So the other part of your question is, why did I make the jump necessarily, or why did others make the jump? And, I look at, being a CIO, and I think, everybody has their good days, everybody has their bad days. But I think every role that I have had has helped prepare me to be better at my role as a CIO. Understanding how an EMR organization functioned and how the software was created, knowing how it's implemented, knowing how it's integrated, knowing how the technology functions, all of those things and those experiences made me, I think, a better CIO.
Mm.
And I think that we get to the situation where we don't get enough external experiences as CIOs. We get into an echo chamber. And to me, anyway, it was an opportunity to step out of that echo chamber and to hear what others are doing, to hear other ideas, other perspectives that can be baked into a new thesis moving forward. And for me, it was about learning as much as it was a help about doing. And
Mm.
I think there are a lot of folks that I know that are super innovative, and I could list probably 4 or 5 of them that have also made a similar move into the vendor side, and expanded their horizons, expanded the opportunity to understand what was capable and was available, and also work for an organization that is very, very focused on a very single thing. And healthcare IT, you have to be focusing on 100 things all at the same time, and this is the ability to really specialize and to help move the organization forward in a very, very specific way. And to me, that's huge. And I'd like to think that at some point when I look at this and say, hey, it's time for me to go back to be a CIO again, because the call of working with doctors and patients and nurses has gotten to be the point where I'm like, okay, I want to go back and be, focused on that mission again. I like to think that what I have learned along the way will give me a different perspective, and I hope provide me a better perspective in terms of how I do my role at that point in time.
Yeah. Powerful idea. But I mean, we've talked about AI, and that we both believe it's going to have a huge impact on healthcare. But I'd love to hear, where do you think AI is going to offer these operational benefits to organizations? Where do you see it really making an impact?
Well, so we are focused. Let's talk about length of stay. All right, we get very focused on length of stay because, first of all, no one should be in the hospital longer than they should be.
Yeah.
Right. We want to make sure that people are getting out within the appropriate time frame. So much for our work around length of stay today, for good or ill across the space, is day of discharge. We're very focused on, like, let's get the patient, the day we're supposed to be out today. Let's make sure the final tests get wrapped or final exams are done. The paperwork's documented. The physicians and specialists have all kind of agreed that it's time for them to go to that next level of care. That's a skilled nursing facility or discharged at home. But we focus on that, because the opportunity for that is it's a lower threshold. It's still hard work, but it's something we could focus on. What organizations aren't focusing on as much around length of stay, that's harder work, is the outlier cases beyond a standard deviation around length of stay. And these are some of the most complicated cases. So, undiagnosed PEs, pulmonary embolisms, or undiagnosed aneurysms, when a patient presents to the ED that something was not caught on a previous exam, these patients tend to be the sickest, most acute patients that move to ICU and take up longer periods of ICU beds. If we can use precision AI in the diagnostic process to make our radiologist or our cardiologist or pulmonologist, make them better and help provide additional findings, we can really bend the curve on some of these long length of stays by identifying these things early, helping our patients stay out of the hospital, right, with a last minute emergency, by appropriately addressing this. And I think the ability for AI to be augmentative in that diagnostic space to help really kind of drive that very complicated length of stay is going to be huge. All right.
Hmm.
I think the other area for AI to really kind of play a role is around the documentation of care. And if you think about, the no bloat is our thing, right? So everyone's trying to document, they try to document everything, they cut and they paste things in. And if you're a hospitalist, it becomes very complicated for you to keep track of what's going on with the patient because the last person just put a bunch of stuff in. Being able to use AI to be able to create appropriate, accurate summaries of a patient's condition from an inpatient standpoint can go a long way to making sure those patients are treated appropriately. Physicians don't miss anything in these long notes. It can also go a long way to making sure our physicians aren't exhausted because they're so focused on reading the notes, so focused on documenting the level of care a patient receives that they miss around, they miss checking on a patient, and a med gets the timing of a med delivery gets missed because they're so focused on notes and documentation. And I think those are all areas where AI is going to play a huge role in helping to maintain better physician clinician wellness, better patient outcomes, and also helping to drive top line revenue growth for these health systems around these appropriate admissions.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about note bloat. I heard a doctor at an ambient clinical voice company say, that she would teach her students or residents that the EHR is great because it has all the information for you. And she said, and it's terrible because it has all the information stored there. And I went up to her afterwards though, and I was like, hey, your ambient solution is going to make that problem worse. It's going to capture literally everything that's said
Mhm.
in the visit.
Yeah.
So, we think we have a notebook problem now. It's going to get worse with this ambient solution. So, to your point, I think those summaries are going to become even more important.
Yeah, but let's think about the antithesis of this, right? You're a physician and you're stuck in this weird triangle of care, trying to keep a half an eye on the computer to document it, keep a half an eye on the patient to hear what they're saying. And maybe, I mean, listen, I don't know how you guys were when you were back in school, but taking notes was insane. You have to write so hard. What's the key stuff? Let's document that. Now imagine you're doing that on a computer where you're paying attention to a patient who's giving you a stream of consciousness about what's going on with her. And then maybe the mom or dad's in the room and they're like, "Hey, you forgot about this thing. Let's." And all of a sudden, you've got two trains of thoughts. You're trying to make sure the person feels like they're connected. That you want to make sure that you're listening to them. They feel like they're going to be cared for appropriately, and you forget something. And I think the ability for ambient to basically be able to say, hey, the mom or the father or the other person with the patient was able to add this other thing and said this, and maybe this is a condition that's really important. Let's make sure we appropriately document that. I think that is huge. We're doing a lot of work today that the organizations are not getting appropriately reimbursed for because they're not capturing them. And the ability to capture everything to make sure physicians are getting appropriately compensated for the care they're providing is really important. And again, I think we want to move our physicians and our nurses away from feeling like they're accountants to making them feel really like they're practicing medicine. And I think that is going to be transformative
Yeah.
for our clinical staff.
Yeah. It'll makes for happy employees. We talked about a couple AI solutions. You gave a couple examples. I talked about ambient. How should a healthcare CIO be approaching this? I mean, we could probably describe a dozen more easily, right? AI solutions, algorithms, platforms, that are hitting the market. What would you tell a CIO of how they should navigate kind of this wave of AI solutions?
I think we have to be very wary as CIOs of the shiny object fallacy.
Hmm.
It's like, hey, this is a really cool thing. Let's look at it, or we're talking about it. And I had an old friend and mentor, one of my CMIOs previously, and Steve used to talk about, let's move this back. Let's move this conversation back. Let's focus on what problem are we trying to solve.
Hmm.
And I think, rather than have a conversation about technology, we need to have a conversation about the problems we're trying to solve. And it's not just about what problem you're trying to solve is this a problem that's worth solving now? Right? Is this a now problem? Right?
Hmm.
I talked earlier about, every health system in this country is under pressure, but every health system in this country is focused on 5 or 6 key strategies, right? And they're focused on trying to get good at risk. They're focused on trying to maintain their bottom line. They're focused on making their doctors happy, their community is happy, and they're focused on 5 or 6 key strategies. And so, is the problem we're solving now? Does it align to one of the organizational strategies? Because if it does, and it can really move the needle on it, then perhaps it gets done. And the last thing is, you have to ask yourself: is it a problem we're solving? All right, is if you solve it, are you going to have measurable improvements in outcomes, right?
Hmm.
Things that are really going to drive care forward, or drive better patient care. And if you can answer yes to those things, and it can align to the mission of the organization, those are the things that should get focus. Those are the things that should get attention. And what I see is sometimes it's the loud voice, sometimes it's a shiny object. They're like, hey, we should be spending some time thinking about a product, and we should be focused about problems and not products, and then find the appropriate range of solutions to help address those problems. And I think taking that approach, and listen, I'm not telling you anything that your listeners probably don't already know. A lot of folks are focusing on this way, but I think reminding people that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater because of AI. All right, we're not throwing out all the processes we've ever had. I've talked to a number of organizations who've said, you know what, we're going to set up a new AI governance process, because AI. And I'm thinking, would you stand up a new governance process because you put in a new phone system? Would you stand up a new governance process because you put a new computer system in? We have governance processes around, is it ethical? All right. Is it proper? Is it good clinical care? We already have processes that address those things. How do we integrate it into technology? All right. We need to educate and enable those groups that already do that work about the power of AI, but we don't need to reinvent the wheel and think about this necessarily 1,000% different. This is a new technology that needs to be integrated into the organization. And if we take it as a shiny object approach based on the previous part of the conversation, and we go out and do things that are unnatural, we're going to end up with outcomes that don't align to where we're trying to go as a health system. We need to think about this the same way we think about anything we bring into the health system, about what the outcome is going to be, how it aligns with what we're trying to do, and then putting it down to the lowest, most effective part of the organization to get it done.
Hmm. That's interesting. And the other challenge I see is that we adopt 1,000 solutions, right? We kind of saw that on the IT side. We had a lab system, an EHR system, a pharmacy system, and then Epic finally built them all, and then they just, replaced all of them. I feel like AI is kind of in a similar place. So I'd love to hear what you think about AI and interoperability as far as like being able to use these algorithms across platforms, or yeah, I mean, the data interoperability matters too, to feed the data into these AI platforms. But yeah, what do you think about that, and kind of, being able to use these AI algorithms across various systems?
Listen, we spent 20 years conservatively trying to drive towards a level of interoperability where we can exchange data, and patients feel like they have the ability to look at their data across systems, and a level of integration. And we're nowhere near perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but we're better than we've ever been. And let's just agree to that. Now, some
Yeah.
people may listen to this and go, "Oh, you're totally wrong." I'm like, I'm in general. All right. We're going down a good path, but we've taken a long time, to your point, of unwinding all those point type solutions, all the spaghetti mess. And a lot of time I spent as a CIO, particularly when I first started at John Muir and we moved through that process, was looking at these point solutions, and saying, hey, let's move to a common framework. Let's use Epic if Epic can do it. We'll bring something else in if Epic can't do it, but we're going to tightly integrate it, and we're going to make sure that it functions and it works. And to the point earlier, it's a problem we're solving, but let's bring it in, integrate it, and try to get to this narrow ecosystem. That's not saying I'm not going to bring in a new technology. What it says is I'm going to bring it in a thoughtful manner and think about realistically how I'm going to integrate it, how I'm going to use it, how it's going to be productive in the organization. And then 3 years from now, I may reevaluate that and say, is it still the right thing for me to continue to do? All right. We've forgotten all about processes as we start thinking about AI, because everyone's rushing to like, try this AI thing. Let's try this AI, try this AI thing. One of the reasons that I was so excited about the opportunity at Aidoc specifically was because of the AI platform. Aidoc has specific algorithms that have created to help drive better outcomes around imaging, radiology, cardiology, pulmonology, neurology, and even some things around ED. And I think those are super cool. But what's super cool was the ability for other organizations to develop algorithms and run them on Aidoc's technology. And if you start thinking about some of the announcements that have come out, even from Epic, specifically looking at getting to a standard around the integration and adoption of AI, so we don't end up in the spaghetti mess of AI algorithms down the line where I've got 50 point solutions that may all be doing something really important. All right. To me, the future is about this AI operating model. These algorithms can connect to it. And then when I connect a new algorithm, it can interoperate with the other algorithms that are already running to find additional things without having to reprogram everything from the beginning. And the problem we have is if we go down the path we're going down now and pushing all these point solutions, we're going to spend the next 20 years trying to rationalize and normalize that data. Maybe we'll do it faster than we did with interoperability. But I think the speed that we see people rushing towards this stuff right now, that is, if I was going to say there was anything around those governance, is don't forget the processes you already have to rationalize applications and technology come to the organization. And following a separate path for AI is likely to push you down this road where you develop and bring in a bunch of point solutions because you don't think about it in an integrated workflow manner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I actually think the better comparison might be like communication systems. Like, why does everyone have 7 different secure messaging systems, including pager, secure text, secure notification, blah blah. Like
You
that's
left
what it
out
feels
fax.
similar to AI,
You
right?
left out faxes. Let's talk about faxes.
Yeah, and you have
I'm
4 different fax services that
it's
all provide.
2024 and we're still faxing people, right? We're doing it digitally though, so it's better. No,
Hey,
I
don't
think
hammer
you're
on the
right.
most interoperable part of healthcare, faxes. Sadly.
The irony is we have computers faxing things to computers and the computers reading the faxes. So what we're still faxing thing is just it's just like we've gone through this weird process of analog, digital, analog, digital, analog, and it's
Yeah,
like
with
wow.
the AI identifying the patient
And then
and
the AI looking at it going, hey, does this really need to be a fax? And they're probably no.
yeah, no, for sure. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fun to see, because there is this need to drive innovation and to use these new technologies. Because if you don't, then shadow IT is going to rear up its head, and some of the doctors are going to start doing it, right? So you have to find a way to enable it. I'd love to hear what other hurdles you see for AI right now that the CIO should be working on to make sure that they overcome it and are able to, use and benefit from these technologies.
Well, I think the big thing is don't forget to leverage what's already working, right? And then those are the existing clinical relationships that the CIO and the CIO's team already have. As budgets move through, there's a process, and the teams that are focused on imaging, the teams that are focused on cardiology, the teams that are focused on these ancillaries or the cores, they bring those needs back and they capture them in a way. And I think the big thing is, again, is if we go to these point types of things, we're going to end up in, like I said, we're going to end up in this kind of in this morass going forward. And I think if I had to say anything, it's like, don't forget the basics. Hey, don't forget what got us here. Don't forget what has been effective. And I think if we leverage those relationships and focus on bringing in AI solutions that address the specific needs that align to the strategic processes of the organization, desires of the organization, those things are going to be successful. All right. And I think it's not, that doesn't say that the organization, as if you've got 10 chips, you don't, you invest 3 of them here and 3 of them here. You probably do want to look at a technology that has a possibility of being really game changing, into the future. and heads that, and maybe you bring it into like this incubation process with part of the organization that's a little more innovative. You don't walk away from your IT process, you don't walk away from your governance, but you make an investment there going, I know we need to be good at this 5 years from now, so let's figure out if this technology can help us lay a good groundwork for that. So I'm not saying don't ever look at something that is future looking, that is not a now. It is just do it in a careful way that doesn't walk away from your physician relationships, doesn't walk away from your ability to integrate, doesn't walk away from all the principles that you use today, and you just completely start the skunk works out there. Like at your point, we'll end up with shadow AI, and that's not good for anybody down the road.
Yeah. It it almost feels inevitable though. It's moving so quickly. Like that's the that's the scary part if I'm a CIO, right? Is that if I have to enable them or they're gonna do it.
Well,
So
I think that if you think about these organizations are getting a lot of pressure, right? So it's not just the CIOs hearing it from the ground up, they're hearing it from their team, they're hearing it from existing partners who are now saying AI this or AI that. And they want to be aligned, and they're also getting it from the top down. The
why
board
aren't we
started
using
question.
AI?
Boards like, hey, what are you guys? The boards were talking about cybersecurity, and now the boards are like, hey, what are you doing about cybersecurity? Oh, and by the way, what are you doing about AI?
Yeah.
And so now there's like these are now, 10 years ago, those weren't C-level conversations at the board level.
Mhm.
Now the board members are asking these types of questions, and they legitimately want to understand how the organization is thinking about these technologies to help them do some of the things we talked about, which is make the physicians more efficient, but also control the overall cost of providing administrative costs of providing healthcare. And I
Yeah.
think the boards are expecting the organizations to take a really hard look at this and come back with a thoughtful approach on this. And again, I go back to do not stand up a separate process for this.
Mhm.
Leverage existing processes that are already working, educate them appropriately of what AI means and what your AI guardrails are going to be and what your outcomes are going to be. And maybe you add a person or two to those overall processes, right? But you already have data governance, you already have clinical governance, you already have ethical committees in the organizations, the IT processes. Resist the urge to stand up this AI thing that brings everything in the organization to a screeching halt because everything has to go through this one committee. You
Mm.
got to push it down. And I think the pressure is going to be from the board of the C's to coming down to IT to say, hey, we need to do this thing. And the CIOs are going to push back and say, hey, we have processes, they work. Let's look at this. Let's add to these things if you think we're missing something. But let's not grind this organization to a screeching halt, because I will tell you right now, as a CIO, there is not a vendor that comes to me that hasn't changed their marketing material. Now everything is AI. I literally have AI in everything that comes across your desk. All right. And now does everything have to get evaluated by this group? And again, you create this morass that slows the decision making process down, and not in a good way.
Yeah. And maybe they need to start meeting twice a month rather than once a month, right? But use the same process or,
You're
that
right.
can be adjusted too.
You're 100% right. But I would also add to that is, like, one of the things that I constantly look at over the last 8 years is every 6 months I review governance. The whole, how does a bill become a law? How do things get done within the organization from an IT and technology perspective? Every 6 months, you look at that and say, are things working? Are things
Sure.
moving through the process? Are things not working? What do I need to change? Governance is something that it is mutable. It is changeable, because you add or subtract from governance based upon it's either working or there's things that are causing problems or challenges or rubs, and you address those in that process. Governance isn't something that you put in place and you lead. It's not. It's like the Constitution. It's a living document. You can edit to it as you need to, all right, but you do it appropriately. And I
Sure.
think that the folks look at this and say, I need a whole new thing for this. And I think that's where this stuff's going to break down, is in
Mhm.
that whole new thing for this. Because when you do that, you've got these other parts of the organization, your part, are going to make decisions within their threshold of making decisions, and you will end up with this out of control shadow AI across that that you don't think about because it came in under the radar, and the next thing you know, you're trying to figure out how to put it all back together again.
And battling fiefdoms. So that's good advice. I love that you're a former CIO, because then I want to hear, is there something that current CIOs are afraid to say, because they're in the role that now that you're on the vendor side, is something, doesn't have to necessarily relate to AI, which we've been talking about. Is there something that you're like, oh, everyone's saying it like in their private circles, but they won't say it out loud?
Oh, that's a good one. I think being a CIO requires as any hospital executive requires a certain amount of tact. Getting to a problem. Nobody wants to hear the words, your baby is not the most beautiful baby at this event. Um, and I think having the ability to look at something externally and go, yeah, that may be a problem, or that may be a challenge, because I don't have to live with the repercussions associated with going, that is a broken process. And there's every CIO in this country is part of a system, for good or bad, that has at least one process. They look at it and go, that's just not fabulous. But
Mm.
because of history, momentum, weight, politics, it's something that is going that way. And I can think of one in my last organization that was just an artifact of kind of how the organization had been built and structured. And it was once when you look through it and go, from a budgeting standpoint, this may not be the best way for us to be thinking about it going forward. But let's talk about that. And if externally, I might look at that and go, that's a terrible idea. I don't recommend you ever do that. You know, consolidate your budgets across these two different portions of your IT spend and move on with your life. Internally, it becomes much more complicated, and everybody wants to actually do their level of control, and you can't go back and go, hey, this is a really bad idea. And so I do think that does give you a little bit of freedom, almost like being a consultant, to go back in and go, hey, you all thinking it, you all know it, and this is not great. And I'm just getting paid to be the person to tell you that this isn't great, that you know it, but you need somebody else to say it for you. There's something like that in every organization. I don't care where you are, it is part of the natural thing. And maybe not being the CIO anymore, it gives you a little bit of more freedom to think about things a little bit differently. Um, but I think that's probably the biggest one. They exist in every organization, and they're always going to exist, for good or ill. That's just the nature of being a human, I think.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And maybe some of them don't even realize it because they've been part of the organization so long that it's just like that's, I mean, one CIO told me his least favorite phrase is that's how it's always been done.
John, listen, they all know it. They all know they're out there. And it's the question is like,
Is
is
it
the
worth the fight?
is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it worth the effort and the bad feelings is going to create to fix this problem, or do I have other fish to fry today? And I think the most of the folks in this space, most of the men and women that are in the CIO role, are looking at us going, no, my most important problem today is this, and this is on my wish list at some point in time.
Sure. Interesting. Well, we always like to wrap up these podcast episodes with a little career advice, a little career experience. So would you say is the best piece of advice that you've gotten in your career that you could share with, the other CIOs that listen?
I was having an interesting conversation the other day with one of the leaders here at Aidoc, and it was about healthcare finance and about the operating capital and how finance and health systems kind of work. And it's like, it seems like you've got a really interesting perspective on this, probably a lot different than a lot of CIOs I've talked to. And why is that? And I had a really good friend and mentor who was the former chief financial officer at John Muir Health, Chris Pass. And I had worked for Chris for a number of years, and Chris was a super good guy, and he was really forward thinking about you know finance and investments in IT, and how investments in IT could pay back dividends for organizations. And Chris really got me thinking about the business of healthcare. And I think sometimes, so often, the CIOs get so focused on, I have to deliver good applications, and I have to go do good technology, and I want to align with physicians, and I want to align with nursing. But I think a lot of times, that for good or ill, they don't think of finance outside of their overall budget.
Mm.
And I think good CIO, great CIO going to that next level is really kind of thinking about the overall health system finance and how the finance and the health systems are affecting everything that gets done in the organization and incorporating that into the decision process, incorporating that into the overall thought process around implementing technologies or implementing processes or helping to manage overall spend. I think that's been huge. And as a result of that, I've had a very different perspective the last several years about, not just about IT budgeting, but how IT can really help the organization, not just cut costs, but how IT can help the organization get appropriately reimbursed for the procedures and processes and things that are being done. And sometimes it's as simple as an Epic build that didn't capture something correctly, or sometimes it's a report that didn't get run or could get run, or a way of looking at it, or driving our clinically integrated networks all to a common platform on Epic to make sure we're managing our risks today, not in the rearview mirror. Those are all things that on their basis can seem like, oh, just a technical build. But if you look at it from an overall organizational alignment, it has a huge opportunity to drive additional revenue to the organization. And investments in those kinds of processes will go a long way towards, one, IT credibility in the rest of the organization, but also helping the organization to be much more financially stable. And I think CIOs are incumbent upon them to start thinking outside the box of IT, and also thinking about how IT can help the organization get compensated appropriately for the things they're doing. And that was something that really kind of changed my perspective on kind of not what I focused on, but made sure that was an element in things that I considered going forward in those projects.
Very interesting. I think that's part of the evolution of the CIO, because when you're just turning on a network and installing desktops, you're not strategic. You're just an expense, your utility. But
No,
that's
you're right.
changed a lot.
100%. And my son's gone into this space too, which is kind of interesting. We were having a conversation today, and I said, at the end of the day, me being the best technologist in the universe and being the best provider of data center services, as an example, right? It doesn't differentiate patient care. It may provide a given utility. I'm in the business of healthcare. I'm not in the business of IT. And so we need to be focused in IT to be focused on the business of healthcare and enabling our clinicians, and maybe we do that by being very good at our role, but we should never forget the primary business of the organization is healthcare. The primary business of the organization is not technology. And I have worked with folks over the years that are very focused on being the best technical organization and trying to control that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just your mission is to be in healthcare. Your mission is not necessarily IT.
Yeah. Well, Bill, this was a fascinating conversation, a lot of great insights and perspectives. So I appreciate you taking time to sit down with us and talk with us about everything that's happening with AI in your transition to Aidoc. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for the CIO podcast by Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcasting application. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it.